In September 1943, the sun sank slowly over Bougainville Island, leaving behind a sky blurred with smoke and the sound of metal. Below, Tukina airstrip sweated oil and dust, where the F4U Corsairs lay scattered like exhausted beasts. Every morning, squadrons VMF 213 and VMF 214 took off from here, carrying the mission of securing air superiority for the Marines' landing operations. According to the Bougainville Offensive, USMC operations record 1,943, they were the fleet's moving shield, tasked with protecting transport convoys from Japanese bombers and keeping the skies clean enough for American troops to reach the beaches. In theory, the Corsair was the symbol of American technological dominance. It carried a Pratt & Whitney R2000 800 engine producing 2,000 horsepower, capable of speeds over 400 miles per hour, and armed with 6 50-caliber Browning M2 machine guns, each loaded with 500 rounds. An entire squadron could unleash over 3,000 rounds in a single burst, an iron storm able to tear apart any aircraft if it hit. But in practice, those numbers created only meaningless rings of fire. According to the USMC Combat Report, September 1943, the average kill ratio of Corsair pilots in the Solomon area reached only 2 to 1, meaning nearly 4 Corsairs were lost for every enemy plane destroyed. Each pilot expended an average of 890 rounds per confirmed kill, and during September alone, the squadrons lost 47 aircraft, most after running out of ammunition before downing their targets. The cause did not lie in fighting spirit. In the psychological warfare reports of Marine Air Group 11, September 1943, more than 70% of pilots stated that they saw bullets hitting the target, but not concentrated enough to cause serious damage. On the footage from gun cameras, the tracer streaks swept around Japanese planes like a torn net covering the sides, top and bottom, yet leaving a void in the center. "We're shooting at ghosts," one officer said. That ghost was distant. At the Vought aircraft factory, where the F4U was designed, engineers set the firing angles of the 6 M2 guns so that their bullet streams converged at 1,000 feet, a point known as gun convergence. Theoretically, this was a safe distance that gave pilots time to aim, lead the target's trajectory, and fire while keeping wing stability. But war doesn't obey theory. In reality, dogfights in the Pacific took place at about 200–400 yards, much closer than anticipated. At that range, the bullet streams from the 6 barrels spread into a cone 20–30 feet wide, broader than the 29 feet wingspan of the Zero. According to the Fleet Air Wing Analysis, August 1943, the probability of all bullets striking a concentrated area sufficient to destroy an enemy aircraft frame dropped to 3%. The price of that miscalculation was measured in lives. The Japanese Zeros, light, fast and agile, often flew in pairs. When a Corsair ran out of ammunition after 2 10-second bursts, it turned to counterattack. One surviving pilot recounted in a debrief report, "I heard bullets hitting the wings, saw the pressure gauge drop to 0, then flames rising from the fuel tank. I knew I had just fired my last rounds." By mid-September, statistics from the 1st Marine Air Wing Situations Summary clearly recorded that 78% of aircraft losses were due to running out of ammunition before destroying the enemy. The pilots called it the empty sky, a void where bullets flew but victory never came. And within that emptiness, the enemy learned to exploit the weakness. A radio transmission intercepted by the U.S. Navy on the 12th of September 1943 revealed that Japanese pilots had recognized the problem. The Corsairs shoot fast, but their bullets scatter like rain. Wait until they stop firing, then strike. That line became the emblem of the squadron's frustration. From commanders to mechanics, everyone saw the Corsair as perfect in power, yet helpless in precision. On the VMF 213 report board, the numbers were posted. An effective hit rate of 1 inch 50 rounds, the lowest in the entire Pacific Air Force. Air warfare was no longer a duel between pilot and pilot, but between formula and reality. Every bullet misaligned by 1 degree, every barrel deviating by an inch, created a lethal gap as wide as an enemy fuselage. And the irony was that American engineers, through their excessive precision, had built a perfect error. According to the Bureau of Aeronautics Technical Bulletin, 1943, the F4U was rated as a masterpiece of precision, but over Bougainville, that precision equaled defeat. In the nights that followed, when the engines were silent and the Black Sea swallowed the runway, only the clinking of metal echoed from the maintenance bay, where mechanics cleaned barrels, replaced ammo boxes, and noted numbers on clipboards. They did not know that one among them was about to do something the entire system had never imagined. In the shadowed corner of Hangar No. 3, a corporal stared at the guns and thought differently, and in that silence, the war was waiting for him. Michael Joseph McCarthy was born in 1,917 inches, South Boston, a neighborhood of red brick houses, the sound of hammers, and the smell of machine oil thick in the air. His father was a mechanic, his mother an elementary school teacher, and their lives were as simple as the heartbeat of industrial America during the Great Depression. McCarthy left high school at 16 and found work in an old auto shop on Dorchester Street. In the memories of those who worked with him, he was quiet, patient, and always carried a small notebook filled with lines of numbers and angles. He didn't fix cars, he measured them. An old mechanic recalled in a 1978 interview with Boston Mechanics Review. He measured every part, then asked why it had to be made that way. In 1936, while the economy was still struggling, McCarthy joined the U.S. Marine Corps. For him, it was steady work, 3 meals a day and a roof to sleep under. According to the U.S. Marine Corps enlistment records, 1936, McCarthy was assigned to the technical branch, specializing in ordnance. After 6 years, he became a staff sergeant in the ordnance crew of VMF 213 Squadron, stationed at Bougainville in 1943. His main duties were maintaining 50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, loading ammunition, inspecting firing systems, and ensuring every gun was ready before each sortie. It was a job without glory. Men like McCarthy rarely appeared in combat reports because their work ended when the cockpit canopy closed. Yet in the quiet moments after the squadron took off, McCarthy would remain on the sand strip, eyes fixed on the fading dots of light in the sky. When the engines disappeared, he returned to the maintenance area, wiped his hands on a rag, started the 16mm projector, and replayed gun camera footage from Captain James' Sweat. The grainy images, mixed with the sputtering noise of an old reel, showed streams of tracer fire wrapping around a Zero's fuselage. He replayed frame by frame, measuring the distance between two streaks with a steel ruler. According to a fellow crewman, he repeated that process hundreds of times over many nights, until he knew the error pattern of the bullet paths as intimately as a carpenter knows the grain of wood. In a notebook page found after the war, McCarthy had written in thin pencil, "At 1,000 feet, circle of fire is approximately equal to 30 feet. Target width 29 feet. Problem, geometry, not aim." He realized that every gun on the Corsair's wings was mounted at a fixed standard angle that ignored the actual combat distance. According to the VMF 213 maintenance log, August 1943, he began comparing live fire data with the theoretical specifications in the Bureau of Aeronautics Manual Section 4.3, and found that the average deviation between the line of sight and the convergence point exceeded 1.8 degrees. It was a small detail engineers might overlook, but for a mechanic, it was an intolerable error. McCarthy belonged to a generation of workers who changed the course of war through practical intelligence. In his era, laborers at Kaiser Shipyard set a world record by welding the Liberty ship SS Robert E. Peary in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. In Michigan, Ford's Willow Run assembly line produced a new B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes. From machine shops to shipyards, they were engineers without diplomas, men without engineering degrees but who understood that metal had a soul and precision was the language of life. McCarthy absorbed that spirit instinctively. When engineers thought in formulas, he thought with his hands. In American culture during World War II, The concept of hands-on innovation became the backbone of industrial effort. Mechanics like McCarthy had no authority to sign design blueprints, but they were the first to see errors. Observing the Browning M2, he understood that what was killing pilots wasn't weak firepower, it was a misplaced equation. Amid the hiss of compressors and the smell of burnt oil, he saw that this war wasn't fought only in the sky, but also in every corner of a workshop, where a misaligned bolt could decide a pilot's fate. His comrades called him Mickey the Mechanic. In the small tent of the ordnance crew, he hung a metal board with chalked words, "Every bullet has a reason." That became the crew's motto. They checked every gun barrel before each mission. One mechanic recalled, "He told us every bullet that misses the target is our fault." Those words were both discipline and conscience. According to the VMF 213 daily log, 10 September 1943, McCarthy spent nearly 200 extra hours that month, half recorded as self-initiated maintenance. Those notes were later cited as evidence of initiative in the U.S. Marine Aviation Ordnance Review 1944. To his superiors, it was diligence. To his comrades, it was the obsession of a man who believed that war could be repaired with a wrench. On the night of the 17th of September 1943, after the squadron returned to an empty sky with 2 more Corsairs lost, McCarthy stayed under the oil lamp's dim light, the gun frame open before him. On the last page of his notebook, he wrote, "If the math is wrong, fix the math." The handwriting trembled in sweat and weak light, but it signaled something greater than any plan drawn in a command tent. In a small maintenance shop amid the Pacific battlefield, a mechanic had begun to rewrite the formula of war. In the files of Marine Aircraft Group 11, a short directive circulated in August 1943 proved decisive. Mag 11 Memo, August 1943, explicitly prohibited adjusting gun convergence angles below 500 feet, the principal reason being the risk of cracking gun mounts and inducing wing fatigue. According to that document, the F4U's wing structure and gun mounts were designed for limited convergence angles, and small differences in firing direction could multiply into hazardous mechanical stresses. Safety of the airframe must not be compromised for immediate tactical gain, the memo stated. That was the engineering law in wartime, a precaution placed above individual experimentation. The operating system around that regulation was a vertical chain of approvals, an extended administrative pipeline. Any proposal to alter structure or weapon systems had to pass through at least 6 levels of approval, from armourer, maintenance officer, squadron commander, group operations, wing engineering, up to the Bureau of Aeronautics. According to operating minutes, the procedure consumed at least 2 weeks under normal conditions, the time required to perform stress analyses, prepare drawings, and run simulated tests. On the Bougainville battlefield, 2 weeks could be the difference between a pilot living or dying. Meanwhile, actual dogfights unfolded in seconds, demanding immediate decisions rather than piled-up reports. This mechanism created a paradox. Long-term safety was preserved by principle, while lives at hand were endangered by that same principle. Technical safeguards became barriers to bottom-up innovation. When a technical problem was recorded in maintenance logs and pilot reports, the only way for an individual technician to act differently was to violate procedure. That is the foundation of the concept we call the theory of disobedience, the argument that in a combat environment, an act of disobedience may represent the highest professional responsibility if it is carried out with deep technical understanding. In McCarthy's mind, the numbers formed an argument. He did not act on impulse, but by calculation. His notes show a series of comparisons between live fire data and specification parameters. At the standard convergence distance, the bullet streams produced a circle whose diameter exceeded the opponent's wingspan. He understood that shortening the convergence distance reduced projectile flight time proportionally, thereby reducing error from target motion lead. From those calculations, an illegal scenario emerged as a rational option, a mathematical gamble rather than a rash act. On the night of 1819 divided by 9 divided by 1943, McCarthy, Together with two colleagues, Corporal Eddie Wilkins and Private First Class Tommy Reyes, decided to take the step that official procedure forbade. They selected Corsair 17883, removed each bolt from the gun mounts, adjusted the angles to converge at 300 feet, increasing the angle by 4 degrees, then reinforced the mounts with 1/4-inch steel plates welded onto the load-bearing points. The action had no permit, no simulated testing, only skilled calculation and measurement with steel rulers, compasses, and a hand accustomed to turning bolts. In his notebook, McCarthy wrote the same blunt line: "If the math is wrong, fix the math." The mechanical calculation on which he relied was simple but decisive. At 300 feet, a bullet's flight time fell to about 33 seconds, while a target moving at the closing speed of a 0 would traverse roughly 50 feet in that interval. When all 6 barrels converged simultaneously into an area of about 6 SQFT, the combined energy delivered to that area reached approximately 40,000 feet-pound for a short burst. That was no longer merely firing. It was a concentrated transfer of energy sufficient to rupture structure, shear wings, and detonate fuel tanks. Though 40,000 feet-pound sounded like a paper calculation, for McCarthy it measured survival. He compared range trials, metal fatigue data from Vought catalogues, and his tactile assessment after reinforcing with 1/4-inch steel, concluding the detail could withstand sudden loads more than engineers feared at least across short combat cycles. He also understood the long-term risk, acknowledging that mounts could fatigue if not properly inspected. That duality is why his action was both a tactical fix and an engineering wager. In military terms, the act was a clear violation, but in the logic of the mechanic, it was a reasonable response when all official channels were slower than the tempo of battle. McCarthy's theory of disobedience was not a reckless challenge to authority, but a recasting of professional duty, where craft and calculation must override an administrative process that fails to keep pace. The provisional conclusion of that theory is, when formal procedure obstructs lives, disobedience can become a duty. Before moving on to the next part, if this story touched you, please like and share it so more people can see it. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Every word from you is the motivation that drives us to create even more powerful stories. On the morning of the 19th of September 1943, the sky over Bougainville was pale grey, like the surface of steel. To the east of Tukina airstrip, 4 VMF 213 Corsairs lifted off into the damp wind from the Solomon Sea. Captain James Sweat led the formation, flying F4U 17883, the only aircraft in the squadron whose guns had been recalibrated by McCarthy to converge at 300 feet. According to the VMF 213 mission brief, 19 Sept 1943, the mission was a routine reconnaissance patrol, but everything changed when they received a radar alert. 15 Japanese aircraft were inbound 9 Zeros and 6 Val dive bombers, approaching the western coast of Bougainville. At 18,000 feet, Sweat saw them first, a glimmering formation in the sunlight, circling like a flock of hunters. He reduced propeller pitch, pushed the throttle, and pulled into a dive. In the gun camera mounted on the fuselage, the bright flashes of anti-aircraft fire below flared and vanished. According to the USMC Combat Report, 19 Sept 1943, Sweat approached from above and behind at about 400 yards, still beyond the new convergence range. He held his finger on the trigger, waiting. When the distance closed to 320 feet, he fired. All 6 Brownings roared, and within 1 second the first Zero exploded like a flare. The left wing sheared off, the fuselage spun into smoke. 20 seconds later, Sweat banked hard and went after the second target. At 300 feet, he fired an 80-round burst. The second target lost its tail and ignited. According to the gun camera footage log VMF 213, reel number 47, the footage captured the moment when the tracers merged into a solid streak of light, like a beam piercing the clouds. A third Zero appeared at the edge of the frame, banking to evade, but Sweat had already dropped his sight line and fired for 0.5 seconds. The bullets pierced the cockpit, the glass shattered, and the Japanese pilot slumped forward. In 45 seconds, 3 enemy aircraft were destroyed, and Sweat had used only about 200 rounds. According to the VMF 213 after-action report, the entire engagement lasted less than 4 minutes. Sweat downed 2 more zeros before his ammunition dropped to half load. The rest of the Corsair formation had barely joined the fight. When they returned to base, aircraft 17883 still carried over 800 unused rounds. The hit rate was almost perfect. The mechanic standing by the runway watched the plane land, eyes following the faint blue smoke drifting from the still-hot gun barrels. That same afternoon, the VMF 213 maintenance bay became the center of a heated debate. Lieutenant Colonel William Millington, operations officer of MAG 11, reviewed the footage and declared in the briefing room, "It violates structural safety limits. This plane shouldn't have flown." He insisted that convergence at 300 feet exceeded the wing's stress tolerance. But Colonel Wade Britt, the squadron commander, stayed silent for 3 minutes before replying, "The plane did fly, and it killed 5 enemies in 4 minutes, according to the command conference notes, 19 Sept 1943. Britt ended the meeting with a short order. Modify every aircraft tonight. That night, when the runway lights went dark, the crackle of welders echoed through the shadows. McCarthy, Wilkins, and Reyes worked without rest, recalibrating every Corsair's gun angle, all set to 300 feet convergence. "We worked until dawn," Reyes recalled in a 1958 interview. "The hangar smelled of oil and burnt steel, but everyone knew we were building something that worked." Within 6 hours, all 22 Corsairs were modified and test-fired over the sea at 4:30, with no detected cracks or wing deformation. On the 20th of September 1943, at 11:40 a.m., they flew again. 8 Corsairs of VMF 213 engaged 20 Japanese aircraft, 12 Zeros and 8 Betty bombers at 15,000 feet over Empress Augusta Bay. According to the Marine Air Combat Record, 20 Sept 1943, Lieutenant Robert Hansen fired first, a 160-round burst that blew out the right engine of a Betty. 15 seconds later, he banked toward a Zero and brought it down with a single 1-second burst. The battle lasted 12 minutes, ending with 15 enemy aircraft destroyed and no Corsair losses. Gun camera footage showed the Corsair's bullet streams now converging like a single ray. At 300 feet, it was no longer a burst, it was a beam, one pilot wrote in his flight log. Lieutenant Colonel Millington, who had opposed the modification, was forced to admit in a memorandum to command that the concentration of firepower at 300 feet has produced unprecedented effectiveness. Ammunition expenditure was recorded at 180 rounds per kill, 5 times more efficient than before. That afternoon, as rain began to fall on the runway, the Corsairs stood in line, wings streaked with soot and burn marks. The pilots stepped down, looking silently toward the far end of the strip, where McCarthy stood wiping his hands, his eyes red from sleeplessness. A soldier whispered, "He did it." The words faded into the wind. On the wet ground, the greasy footprints of mechanics mingled with the wheel tracks of propellers, as if to prove that the victory that day had not begun in the cockpit, but in a hangar filled with the sound of welding the night before. And in that moment, proof replaced faith. News of the 20th of September 1943, battle spread faster than the official communiqué. From Bougainville, the VMF 213 report was transmitted by radio to Rabaul, then relayed to the Pacific Fleet. According to the USMC Operations Summary, 22 Sept 1943, the final line of the dispatch contained only one sentence: "All 6 guns hit as one." That sentence alone was enough to make every squadron across the Pacific Theatre pause and recheck their technical data. Within 11 days, from September 20 to the 1st of October 1943, every Marine Air Wing unit operating F4U Corsairs was ordered to adjust convergence down to 300 feet. Temporary handwritten instructions were circulated by telegram, carbon-copied, and even taped directly onto maintenance bay panels. At Espiritu Santo, VMF 214 under Major Gregory Pappy Boyington became the first squadron outside VMF 213 to adopt the modification. According to the maintenance log VMF 21427 Sept 1943, the adjustment was carried out over 2 consecutive nights, using McCarthy's pencil-drawn firing angle sketch and instructions for reinforcing the gun mounts with 1/4-inch steel plates. When Boyington reviewed the combat footage, he simply said, "That's the way a Corsair should fire." From that moment, Marine air combat tactics changed. Pilots were retrained to fire at 300–400 feet instead of 800 feet, shifting from long-range gunnery to close-range attack, exploiting the full destructive power of concentrated fire. According to the Pacific Theater Air Combat Report, December 1943, the results in the 3 months following McCarthy's adjustment were astonishing. From September to December 1943, Corsair squadrons shot down 487 Japanese aircraft while losing only 43 Corsairs, achieving a kill ratio of 11, 3-1, the highest in the entire Pacific Air Force. Ammunition efficiency improved by 368%, averaging just 190 rounds per kill compared to the previous 890 rounds. Analysts describe this as a combat multiplier effect, a small mechanical change magnified into a strategic transformation. The improvement also triggered a psychological shift. Pilots, once demoralized by poor hit rates, now felt in control of the battlefield. According to the Marine Fighter Wing Morale Report, Oct. 1943, mission completion rates rose 20%, and early disengagements dropped by half. They flew with less fear, knowing each burst of fire carried real lethality. In diaries sent home, many wrote, "Now the Corsair is finally fighting the way it was built to." The greatest impact was on human life. Statistics from the 1st Marine Aircraft Wing Personnel Loss Table 1943 showed that before the change, squadrons averaged 7 pilots KIA killed in action per week. 3 months later, that number dropped to 1.2 KIA per week, the equivalent of nearly 800 lives saved in the final 4 months of 1943. The difference did not come from thicker armor or stronger engines, but from a 700 feet shift in convergence distance. In industrial warfare, efficiency is often measured by output and speed, but here it was measured in lives preserved. Internal reports from the Bureau of Aeronautics sent to Washington in December officially recognized the phenomenon as a field innovation of exceptional impact. When BUAir engineers replicated the modification, they discovered that convergence at 300 feet did not exceed stress limits, provided the 1/4-inch steel reinforcement plate was applied as McCarthy had done. According to the BUAir Technical Evaluation Report, Feb 1944, the reinforcement increased gun mount joint strength by 12% and reduced wing oscillation during sustained fire. The brief conclusion read, "Modification approved. Incorporate for all F4U production lots." From there, the effect spread beyond the Corsair. The Army Air Force's Tactical Design Division realized the principle could apply to other aircraft models. By early 1944, the P-51 Mustang, P-47 Thunderbolt, and P-38 Lightning all tested close-range convergence between 250–350 feet, directly referencing McCarthy's report. According to the Army Air Force's Gunnery Division, 1944, average fighter accuracy increased 34%, and short-range firing doctrine became standardized in training manuals. The event became a textbook example of the theory of innovation diffusion from the bottom up, where invention does not begin at the engineer's desk, but in a battlefield hangar. A sergeant with a wrench had done what an entire engineering hierarchy had hesitated to try. Post-war analysts called it the McCarthy effect, a lesson in the relationship between creativity and organization. Sometimes, to win, a system must learn to trust its mechanic. By the end of 1943, the U.S. Marine Corps possessed the most effective fighter aircraft in the Pacific Theater, and in the maintenance log of every Corsair built thereafter, under the line Gun Convergence, one number was added in blue ink, 300 feet. A small detail, but one that changed how America fired, how it survived, and how it defined the power of a mechanic's intelligence in wartime. By the spring of 1944, the Pacific War had entered a new phase. Reports from every Corsair squadron confirmed exceptional performance, and the U.S. Prize and Navy Bureau of Aeronautics, BURA, could no longer ignore the numbers. On the 18th of February 1944, an official directive, BURA Directive No. 482, was issued, standardizing the 300 feet convergence for all F4U Corsair models. According to records held in the Naval Aviation Records Division, the document stated, "tested and approved by engineering staff." That small notation ended months of technical debate, but it also erased the name of the man who had made the change possible. There was no McCarthy, no VMF 213 maintenance crew, no mention of the night at Bougainville. Only the anonymous phrase remained, "engineering section." In a supplemental BUAir report sent to the Navy Department in March, engineers at Patuxent River wrote that the F4U's wing structure, when reinforced with 1/4-inch steel plating, showed stress tolerance exceeding the original standard by 12%. They acknowledged that 300 feet convergence increased combat efficiency without compromising wing integrity. Yet no one asked where the idea had begun. At a desk in Washington, innovation had no author. It was reduced to statistics. In wartime, every invention belonged to the institution, not the individual. After victory, America returned to peacetime rhythm, and McCarthy, the man who had defied an entire system, returned to being an ordinary mechanic. He left the Marine Corps in December 1945, and according to his U.S. Marine Corps discharge papers, his post-war occupation was listed as automobile repairman. He opened a small garage in South Boston, near the docks that had once shipped aid to the Pacific. The shop was called Mickey's Garage, with no large sign, only a white-painted wooden board swinging above the door. Neighbors recalled that he worked quietly and rarely spoke of the war. In a rare 1965 Boston Globe interview, he said, "I fixed guns the way I fix cars. Both can kill if you misalign a bolt." The quote appeared in a small local news column. No one noticed. On the 8th of July 1979, McCarthy died of a heart attack at age 62. His obituary in the Boston Globe read simply, "Michael J. Dade II, McCarthy, veteran, U.S. Marine Corps, World War II." There was no mention of his work, no reference to VMF 213, no Corsair. He was buried at Mount Benedict Cemetery, among the graves of mechanics who had also served in the war. To America, he was an ordinary citizen. To history, he was a blank space between two lines of data. But those who had flown with him remembered. In his 1989 memoir, Captain James Sweat wrote, "They called me an ace. 15.5 kills, they say. But the truth is, I was just the first man who pulled the trigger on Mickey's math. He made me an ace." The line was reprinted in the Marine Aviation Oral History Series, Volume 2. To Sweat, his victories were the product of a mechanic who understood how to turn mechanics into survival. In a letter to his family dated January 1944, Lieutenant Robert Hansen of VMF 213 wrote, "There's a sergeant in our squadron who changed everything. He adjusted our guns so they hit what we shoot at. He probably saved my life." Hansen was killed a month later. The letter was found in his suitcase when his body was returned to Hawaii. Those testimonies were not enough to earn McCarthy a medal. In the military system, low-ranking innovators had no pathway for recognition. Awards were tied to rank and command records, while maintenance personnel were only mentioned when they made mistakes. The bureaucracy absorbs success but records failure, reads a line from the U.S. Naval Procedures Review, 1951. For McCarthy, his achievement was absorbed by the very process he had once defied. It wasn't until 1987, 8 years after his death, that the Marine Corps Aviation Association, MCAA, erected a memorial plaque at the National Museum of the Marine Corps, honoring 87 individuals listed as unsung heroes of marine aviation. At the bottom line, in small letters, it read, SSG Michael McCarthy, VMF 213 Ordnance Crew. There was no caption, no story, but for the pilots who had survived, that line carried more weight than any medal. One of them said, standing before the plaque, "He didn't need a medal. His proof is in the sky." 40 years after McCarthy gripped a wrench on the Tukina runway, the world had forgotten most men like him. Yet every time someone looks at an F4U Corsair hanging in a museum, 4 numbers are still engraved on its control panel. 300 feet. It is the signature of an anonymous genius, a man who proved that sometimes an act of defiance can take the form of technical justice, and that the price of such humility is oblivion. On the old runway that has become a memorial at Bougainville, the wind still passes through sheets of rusted tin, carrying faint echoes of engines that once rose into the sky 70 years ago. Inside the National Air Museum, a restored F4U Corsair stands beneath white lights. Under its right wing, a small note reads, "Gun convergence, 300 feet." None of the visitors know that the number was once the result of a forbidden act, but for aeronautical engineers, it marks the beginning of a technical principle that has endured through generations. That principle, called close-range harmonization, became the default standard for modern fighter aircraft. According to the USAF Weapons System Evaluation 1975, the M60, one Vulcan cannon on the F-16 was calibrated so that all rounds converged at roughly 1,000 feet, the close quarters range of the 20th century. On the F-35, the GAU 22 amperes cannon is aligned using the same logic: concentrate fire at a shorter range rather than scattering it at distance, prioritizing hit probability over reach. The technique traces back to the equation McCarthy scribbled on wrinkled paper with a steel ruler in a Bougainville hangar in 1943. It proved that a small mechanical adjustment could shape an entire combat doctrine for the future. Yet McCarthy's legacy was more than engineering. It was a lesson in the morality of craft, the belief that understanding one's tools matters more than blind obedience. The 20th century was the age of machines, but mastery over machines belonged not to those who wrote formulas, but to those who touched them every day. The workers at the Kaiser shipyards on the Willow Run assembly line, or in that small tent at Bougainville, shared the same creed. Do the right thing, even when you're not allowed to. They were the unseen links that built America's industrial victory. During a 1987 technical symposium of the Marine Aviation Association, as young engineers presented projects on precision under stress, an old pilot stood up and said, "We won because someone decided to tighten a bolt differently." The room fell silent. That sentence captured a simple truth. Technology advances not by orders, but by the courage of those who take responsibility when the system is wrong. McCarthy did not betray discipline. He was loyal to a deeper law, the law of craft. The morality of craft is rarely written in manuals. It carries no titles, no ceremonies, yet lives in the smallest gestures, rechecking an angle, inspecting a weld, replacing a washer no one asked for. In war, such details separate life from death. In peace, they become the foundation of quality and trust. Where engineers read numbers, craftsmen see matter breathing. Where commanders think in procedures, they think in consequences. And at that intersection between reason and instinct, modern industry was born. McCarthy's story also mirrors the timeless tension between academic knowledge and practical wisdom. While wartime engineers defended design principles with stress charts and load graphs, mechanics saw with their eyes, listened to metal, and understood that real operation never matched theory. That friction created progress. Mid-century America grew strong not because it owned more patents, but because it listened to its workers. McCarthy, in silence, embodied that capacity, the power of practical intellect to overcome bureaucracy and deliver what the system could not see. Today, when an F-35 pilot pulls the trigger, he fires by a principle written by a mechanic's faith and daring. Modern engineers call it the legacy of precision under constraint, the heritage of accuracy born from limitation. That legacy bears no official name of McCarthy, but it lives in every lecture on aeronautical mechanics, in every student exercise calculating convergence. When his record closes, what remains is not the data, but the lesson of quiet courage. McCarthy proved that innovation needs no title, that professional ethics lie in responsibility for one's own work. A wrench, a sight angle, a single night's labor in the dark all together formed a legacy greater than any medal. Amid the wind on the museum floor and the light glinting off the blue-painted Corsair, the words, "Gun Convergence, 300 feet," still shine. They are not a specification, they are a reminder. Some heroes never fly. They bend down, tighten the last bolt, and change the course of a war. From an unknown mechanic on Bougainville, Michael McCarthy proved that war is sometimes decided not by rank, but by the hands that truly understand the tools they hold. The legacy of Gun Convergence, 300 feet, stands as enduring proof of the intelligence of those who worked in the shadows and brought light to the battlefield. Thank you for watching. We're committed to bringing you the most exceptional stories. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more untold battles.